the Elizabethan curriculum, a classical education for the modern man. Lecture 17, Plutarch, Brutus, and the Costa Principle. There is a question that Plutarch's Life of Brutus raises on almost every page and never quite answers. The question is whether a man can be both genuinely good and genuinely wrong simultaneously. Not wrong because his motives were corrupt. Not wrong because he was deceived. Wrong because his virtues themselves, the very qualities that made him admirable, were the qualities that made him catastrophic. Whether goodness of a particular kind can be a form of blindness, whether principle carried to its logical conclusion without the tempering of practical intelligence becomes its own kind of violence. Plutarch does not answer this question because he cannot. It is not the kind of question that has an answer, but he constructs the life of Brutus in such a way that the question is inescapable, and the Elizabethan reader who came to it after the life of Caesar found himself in the position of a juror who has heard both cases and cannot, in good conscience, convict either defendant. Marcus Junius Brutus was, by the standards of the Roman aristocracy, almost preternaturally well-credentialed. His family claimed descent from Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who had expelled the Tarquin kings and founded the Republic in 509 before the Christian era. This ancestry was not merely a matter of family pride. It was a political identity and a political obligation. The name Brutus meant, in the Roman imagination, the man who puts the Republic above everything, including his own family. Lucius Junius Brutus had executed his own sons for conspiring to restore the kings. This was the standard, the namesake. Marcus Junius Brutus carried it with complete seriousness from his earliest political life. He was also, Plutarch tells us, with evident admiration, a man of genuine philosophical cultivation. He had studied deeply in the Platonic tradition, had written philosophical works of his own, was known for the quality of his thinking and the seriousness of his intellectual commitments. He was not a man who acted from impulse or passion. He thought carefully, read widely, and brought to every decision the same quality of deliberate moral reasoning that his philosophical education had developed. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of man that the education this course has been describing was designed to produce, and he killed Caesar. The decision to join the conspiracy was not made quickly. Plutarch shows us Brutus in the weeks before the Ides of March, in a state of anguished deliberation that his wife Porcia noticed, and that he could not entirely conceal. He was close to Caesar. Caesar had shown him specific favor, had protected him after Pharsalus, when Brutus had fought on Pompey's side, had promoted him, had trusted him. There was genuine affection between them. Brutus was not a man who found betrayal easy or who dressed it up as something else. He understood exactly what he was doing, and he did it anyway because he had concluded, after long and careful thought, that it was necessary. His reasoning, as Plutarch reconstructs it, was this. Caesar was not yet a king. He had not yet formally assumed monarchical power. But the trajectory was clear. Every month brought new honors, new powers, new concentrations of authority. In a single pair of hands, the Republic, the system of shared power and constitutional balance that was the inheritance of 5 centuries of Roman political development, was being dissolved not by force but by increment, each step small enough to be tolerated, the cumulative effect catastrophic. If Caesar was stopped now, before the monarchy was formally established, the Republic might be restored. If he were not stopped, the Republic was finished. The window was narrow. Brutus decided to act while it was still open. This reasoning is not foolish. Several of its premises are correct. Caesar was indeed moving towards something that looked like monarchy. The Republic was indeed in serious danger. The diagnosis was accurate. What was wrong was not the analysis, but the remedy. And what was wrong with the remedy was not its morality, but its polity. Brutus killed Caesar and did not kill Antony, because killing Antony seemed like mere butchery rather than principled tyrannicide. And this decision, this distinction between the acceptable and the unacceptable violence, was the decision that lost the republic he was trying to save. Antony survived, rallied Caesar's veterans, drove the conspirators from Rome, and the republic died anyway, more bloodily and more completely than it would have done if Caesar had lived. Plutarch traces the aftermath with the steady melancholy of a man who knows how the story ends. Brutus and Cassius in the east, raising armies, managing alliances, conducting the administrative business of two men who have killed a tyrant and now find themselves in the position of having to govern the world they thought they were liberating. The tensions between them, documented in the famous quarrel scene where Brutus accuses Cassius of corruption, and Cassius feels the injustice of it, give Plutarch some of his most psychologically acute pages. Two men under impossible pressure, their friendship strained by the weight of what they have done and what they are trying to do, and underneath the quarrel, the shared knowledge, never quite spoken, that they are probably going to lose. There is a detail in the life of Brutus that Shakespeare takes almost unchanged into Julius Caesar, and that is worth pausing on because it demonstrates exactly what Plutarch is doing at his best. The night before the Battle of Philippi, where Brutus and Cassius will meet the armies of Antony and Octavian, Brutus is sitting alone in his tent reading. As was his habit, in quiet moments, even on campaign, a figure appears. Brutus asks who it is. The figure says it is your evil genius, Brutus, and that they will meet again at Philippi, and then it is gone. Whether this actually happened, we cannot know. Whether Plutarch believed it happened is a different question from whether he chose to include it. And he chose to include it because it serves the biographical purpose with perfect economy. Brutus is a man haunted, not by guilt exactly, because Plutarch does not show us a guilty Brutus in any simple sense, but by something, by the awareness that the thing he has done has a weight that does not diminish with time or with the construction of justifications. The ghost is the weight. The evil genius is not Caesar's ghost, but Brutus's own action, returned to face him in the dark. Shakespeare will make this scene one of the most powerful in Julius Caesar, and he takes it directly from North's Plutarch with minimal alteration, which tells you that North had already done most of the dramatic work. The scene needed almost nothing added because Plutarch had already understood its theatrical potential. He was, among his other qualities, a writer who knew how a scene should land. Philippi is a double battle. The first engagement goes badly for Brutus on one side and well on the other. Cassius, believing the whole battle is lost when it is not, asks his servant to kill him, and the servant does. Brutus, learning of Cassius's death, calls him the last of the Romans, a phrase that Shakespeare preserves because it is already perfect. The second battle goes badly for Brutus entirely, and he flees with a small remnant of his forces into the hills. His end is characteristic of the man. He does not surrender. He does not attempt negotiation. He asks several of his companions in succession to hold his sword while he runs onto it, and they all refuse, too loyal and too grief-stricken to perform the service. Finally, a man named Strato agrees, turns his face away, and holds the sword. Brutus runs onto it himself. He dies saying, And Plutarch reports this with evident approval, that he was proud to have lived a life in which virtue had been real rather than merely a word, which is a philosopher's dying statement. The man who has spent his life in the Platonic tradition affirming at its end that the effort was genuine, even if the outcome was catastrophic. Antony, standing over the body, says that of all the conspirators, only Brutus acted from genuine public motives rather than personal envy or grievance. He was, Antony says, Shakespeare gives him the longer version of this, the noblest Roman of them all, and it works in the play for the same reason it works in Plutarch. It is spoken by the man who defeated him, which makes it the most credible possible testimony. Where your enemy's acknowledgement of your virtue is worth more than your friend. What does Plutarch think of Brutus? This is harder to answer than it appears, and the difficulty is itself the point. He admires him clearly and consistently. He never questions his sincerity or his courage or the quality of his philosophical character. He documents the catastrophic failure of the enterprise with equal clarity. He does not reconcile these two things because they cannot be reconciled. Brutus was genuinely good and genuinely wrong, and both of these things were consequences of the same qualities. The philosophical training that gave him the moral clarity to act gave him the political blindness that made the action futile. The education that made him admirable made him ineffective. This is not a comfortable conclusion, and Plutarch does not try to make it comfortable. He simply shows you the man completely and without simplification, and leaves you with the question. The Elizabethan reader left with this question was left with it in a specific political context. The question of when, if ever, it is right to act against a ruler who is destroying the constitutional order was not abstract in the 1590s. It had a name and an address. It sat on the throne at Whitehall and was growing old without an heir. The answer that Plutarch's Brutus provides is not reassuring. A man of impeccable virtue, acting from the best possible motives, with the survival of a constitutional tradition as his explicit goal, managed to accelerate the destruction of everything he was trying to save. This is the cautionary tale that the Elizabethan political class needed to hear, and Plutarch told it without editorializing, which made it more rather than less powerful. In our next lecture, we turn to Antony, who is, in many ways, Brutus's opposite in the lives, a man of enormous natural gifts and almost no philosophical formation, whose greatness and whose ruin came from the same source, and whose story, filtered through Plutarch and then through Shakespeare, became one of the defining images of Western culture's understanding of what it means to choose love over empire and find. We will also look at Coriolanus, whose life Plutarch pairs with Alcibiades, and who represents a third possibility beyond Caesar's strategic greatness and Brutus's principal failure. The man whose virtue is real, but whose virtue is also his most catastrophic flaw. The soldier who cannot perform the civilian self that political life requires, who would rather burn his own city than compromise his pride, and whose story is the darkest thing in all of Plutarch's Roman lives. End of Lecture 17.